Always scratch my head when I hear people talk about trap finding and the paranoia that follows it as being boring at their table. From some of the comments on my videos, I guess that people find them to be a minor nuisance that triggers an endless bout of dice rolls and never really adds any engagement or tension to the experience. I disagree. And so I'm excited that my tank class supporters here on YouTube that not only get access to my videos early and get to decide what I talk about, decided that this was the topic to muse upon today. In my mind, there's essentially four aspects that are important to address in order to make traps exciting and engaging. The first is the degree of threat. The second, the logic surrounding the items in question. The third being the endless dice problem. And fourth being how to maintain engagement and tension. When it comes to dealing with threat, a lot of the time, traps that are put in Dungeons & Dragons just don't add a lot of threat. But it's an easy problem to fix because you can just increase the threat that they put out there. If you've found that traps in published adventures or in your own homebrew are just minor hiccups that don't really have any impact, then it's time to adjust the threat of your traps. This doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to just increase the damage, though making traps hit like a truck is one way to get people to be very concerned about whether or not they're put into play and whether or not they're right around the corner. But in addition to increasing the amount of damage that a trap does, you can also increase the impact that it has on the ongoing gameplay loop. One way to do that is to, for instance, have a trap that imposes some kind of condition effect that is going to last for a significant period of time. Whether or not that's a foul-smelling goop that without some means of cleaning it off is going to alert people to your presence, the striking of a gong that informs the rest of the dungeon that you're already there, broken bones or poisons with long-lasting influence. Something that imposes some kind of status effect is a great way to ensure that your trap is important for the players to avoid. And that's really one of the biggest goals. If it's important for the players to avoid the trap, then it drives players to engage with the trap so as to find a way to overcome it. Similarly, kind of with the gong, if you have traps that impact the ongoing adventure, then you're creating a trap that requires people, or at least encourages them, to pay closer attention. Alarm traps that alert different portions of the dungeon are the most classic ones of these, as it raises the alert level of the people around, increases the chances of random encounters, brings people from faraway rooms, or puts people into more defensive and dangerous positions. Those are a classic way that a trap can impact the ongoing adventure and require players to engage in order to avoid consequences. Another potential option is the blocked path trap, a trap that seals a door and forces the group to go the harder way around a dungeon that perhaps has been jacade, as Justin Alexander used to coin it, a dungeon that has a shortcut path that would have been useful but has a trap blocking it to keep people from using that shortcut is one way that you can have a ongoing influence in how the adventure plays out by utilizing a trap for that purpose. I think that if you increase the danger level of your traps by having either a harsher consequence, a longer lasting consequence, or a consequence that adjusts the gameplay from that point on, is one way to make traps far more engaging. But it still doesn't address the problem of feeling like traps are just these little gotchas that were thrown in for no purpose other than to drain resources. And that is something that needs to be avoided. And that's about the logic of the trap. Having little to no logic for a trap is a easy faux pas to fall into, but a major one. It's pretty common that we'll have a guideline like, say, John 4's 5-Room Dungeons that tells us us to put in a puzzle or trap at a certain point, and so we think that adding a trap is going to add engaging gameplay. But in and of itself, a trap for the purpose of being a trap is not all that fun, particularly if it's something that doesn't have nice world-building hints to it that help people to recognize it might be there, or at least to look back and recognize that they could have known that it was there. But throwing in a trap for the purpose of dealing a little bit of damage is kind of a waste of time. One of the things that makes it easy to fix, however, is envisioning the why that the trap is there, and then adding personification to the trap itself. Personification, essentially the idea of saying this trap is a creature or a person, it has a purpose and a why, and it acts upon that, is an easy way to decide whether or not a trap belongs in a place. If you have a trap that deals a moderate amount of damage, why is it there? Is it there to threaten adventurers of significant power like those that are coming in? Probably not. If it only does a moderate single hit of damage to one target, it's not going to take out an adventuring group, and it might not even be strong enough to take out one adventurer. So what is the purpose of that trap then? Maybe the purpose of that trap is to keep out more common folk that are trying to come in there, at which point it needs to be something that is placed in a way that would engage or stop common folk from entering, instead of in a place that's deviously hidden and purposefully set up to catch adventurers. Whereas a more deadly trap might need to be placed so that the common folk that are on other things are not going to engage with it, or they're assumed not to be around, and you're deviously placing it in order to be able to bypass the senses of clever rogues and the like. If you've got an alarm trap, the purpose of it is to alert the dungeon that somebody has come into the location, and so that alarm trap needs to be in a place where you can catch people who don't belong there, but not catch people who do belong there. By giving it a personality and purpose, you can place traps in a way where they fit the story and belong, instead of just ham-fistedly throwing them in there for no real purpose. By giving them that purpose, it solves the logic problem and makes traps make sense. And it's always important for all of our encounters that we think about, does this really make sense in the situation here? Because it's far more important that you balance a situation to make sense to anybody who goes into that situation than that, for instance, you balance the challenge of that encounter. Focusing on situation first leads to awesome gameplay and gives our players the feeling of immersion and choice, whereas focusing on the mechanical numbers effects of things that are in there tends to abstract and make things feel more like a game and a little less like a role-playing game. Roleplay, of course, being the art of choice. When it comes to endless dice, I personally avoid the endless dice loop of paranoia by not calling for checks endlessly just because somebody is searching for a trap. It is where most of the problem lies, that if we put anything into our games that ends us up in a gameplay loop of roll dice, move 5 minutes, roll dice, roll dice, roll dice, we're starting to lead ourselves more to playing a game of Yahtzee and a lot less like playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons, because we want to focus on choices that people are making. We don't want to focus on the dice that they're rolling. One thing that really helps with this is to hide dice that are related to these kinds of unknowable things. It's pretty common that people will go into the gameplay loop of, I'm going to search this door. Go ahead, roll perception. Dice is rolled. I'm going to search the room. Roll perception. Go ahead. I'm going to search inside this cabinet. Roll perception. I'm going to check for traps on this chest. Roll perception. This endless dice rolling phenomenon is obviously boring. In order to fix that, hide the dice and only ask for a check when you haven't used up a check previously. If, for instance, what I do is I have a player roll using a module that hides the dice from them, a perception check, and I make a quick note of what that perception check is when they're entering a trap finding situation. They then tell me I'm checking the door and then opening it, I'm looking through this room. I'm gonna investigate this chest, and I wait until there is something something for them to find, and when there is something for them to find, then I take their perception check into account. In all cases, my narration tells them what they do or do not find, and so it effectively as if they were using a rolled perception check every time as far as my narration is concerned. Then after they've gone to that chest that was trapped even though everything else was not, if they succeeded on the perception check, then I'll be giving them some information that makes it clear that they succeeded. If they failed, then I will not be giving them that information, but as they engage with the chest a little bit further, they're going to discover that they didn't have that information as the trap snaps onto them and it's all made clear. After that point, I ask for another roll, note it down, and we begin again the cycle. This requires only one roll, even though there are multiple items being stated to be checked, so there's not a bunch of endless dice rolling, and they don't have to constantly go back and tell me that they're checking this individual item one at a time if there are things that they do as standard procedures. And that's the other aspect that can help to overcome the slow gameplay feel of trap finding, is find out what your party typically does and write it down. Ask them when they're going through a door, are you going to be checking every single door? Are you going to be checking every single space of the floor? Make it clear that this is going to make things take much longer if they're doing that, and apply time effects to the game. Rolling for random encounters every hour. If it takes 10 minutes to check every single room, and they're checking every single room, and it takes 10 minutes for every 2 doors, and they're checking every door, means that more random encounters are the cost that you get for spending a lot of time being super cautious. Perhaps at that point they choose not to check every room, but they are going to check every door, and they'll find the balance that suits them best. By adding time pressure, you allow the players to have the choice between how they engage with the dangers that are out there, depending upon their own comfortability with risk. Finally, the matters of engagement and tension, though they are largely addressed by doing things like adding further threats to increase the tension of stuff involved there, the other portion that I feel like helps with engagement and tension is to properly utilize passive perception. Passive perception, in my mind, provides hints instead of providing solid answers. And so how I will narrate the successful detection of something with passive skills versus active skills is very, very different. If somebody is actively searching for a trap and they succeed on a perception check to find one, I will tell them that they have discovered a trap because that's what they were looking for. If, however, they succeed passively on finding a trap, I will give them a hint in the narration that tells them that there is something there worth looking at more closely. Once they've found something to look at more closely, then they can make active checks in order to gather more information about what it might be. Thinking about your traps as being in the world and personified, having the desire to stay hidden, but having to influence the world, you start to think about what kind of small signs might be notable that a trap is present. For instance, a dart trap in a wall is going to have some means of firing out, so it's going to have holes hidden in that wall. Perhaps they might be behind some kind of plaster or the like that's otherwise in a stone wall, and so might have subtly different colors that you can point out that there's a few patches of the wall that don't quite match up the same stone texture as the rest of the wall. That's a hint that's going to get your player potentially curious enough to look into it. And if they're not the first time, then after some darts come flying out at them, they will probably check the next time you mention something like that. Finding the smallest hint that you can give and giving that out passively, and then giving larger hints or just straight yes/no answers in response to more specific checks is the way to add further engagement in your narration and increase tension as these small hints spark bouts of paranoia and separately from the overall ongoing game. The other one is, of course, to add time pressure, not only by having a scripted amount of time for different searches through rooms and increasing that amount of time, by having a need to accomplish certain tasks within a certain time frame, makes picking and choosing what you do and don't search in a dangerous situation much more impactful. And when there is choices to be made, tension tends to be higher, especially if bad choices come with bad consequences. And so by increasing the amount of pressure that your players have to do things within a certain time frame, you increase the amount that they're going to engage with the challenge that's faced before them. Thanks so much again to the Tank Class supporters for selecting this topic, and if you would like to decide what I muse upon week by week, then maybe you should join them. Thanks for joining us today, thanks for watching, and happy adventuring.